I'm Byron B. Miller. I'm the head of the Smart Buildings Working Group of the LoRa Alliance, and I'm going to introduce the next speakers for this morning. Our first presentation is a great example of the ecosystem working together. It's also super important as it's not just about using LoRaWAN to save money or make things easier or whatever. This is actually making people safer and potentially even saving lives. So please join me in welcoming Bruce Chatterley, CEO of Senate, and John Rusk, founder of ProSentry, as they're going to detail how they've been using LoRaWAN in natural gas leak detection. Very important topic. Bruce and John, come on up.
Good morning. Being from the West Coast, it feels like the middle of the night. So I'm here to introduce John Rusk from ProSentry. If you don't know, Senate is a developer of cloud-based software and services for the rapid deployment of IoT networks where they're needed, when they're needed, and at the right cost. But really what we do is we partner with industry experts and vertical experts to solve big problems that really deliver on the promise of IoT. So for example, safety, security, economic benefit, enterprise benefits. One of those problems that we're solving is in the area of methane leak detection. And this is squarely in the area of safety for a variety of different verticals. And so tomorrow you'll hear a little bit more about what we're doing in the utility space, so working directly with utilities. Today, you'll hear from one of the world's foremost experts in the space of buildings and working with cities relative to those buildings to secure them in a variety of different ways. So John Rusk is one of our trusted partners, and I've already learned a lot from working with John, and I'm sure you'll learn a lot today. John is an expert in buildings in particular. He's got a long history in doing project management and construction management for actually building these buildings. He's also a professor at Columbia. Sorry, I almost said the wrong university. He's also a professor at Columbia University, and we are really, really proud to have John as a customer, but more importantly as a partner in solving this important problem of methane leak detection. But John will talk to you about that today. Offline, I think John will talk to you about the other problems he's solving for multi-dwelling units also. So without further ado, I'll introduce you to John Rusk.
So much. That's awesome. Good morning, everyone. It's so nice to be here. So my name is John Rusk. I'm the founder of ProSentry. This is the first apartment building in New York City, Stuyvesant Flats, 1869. This is the Beresford, 1929. These are standard New York City projects, 1955 to 1965. And this is Madison House, opened in 2022. All of these buildings share the exact same water monitoring system. This guy. So the question is, how do we make the shift to smart sensors? And that's what I'm here to talk about today. So first, we're going to start with the history of fire detectors. So in the beginning, people would notice that their house was on fire with their eyes and their nose, but it required them to be home to notice this unfortunate situation. So as soon as the Industrial Revolution really started up, they developed the telegraph fire alarm. So with the telegraph fire alarm, this device was connected to the fire departments through electrical lines. If you then smelled or saw a fire in your house, you would run out to this box, you would turn that little lever, and that would cause these gears to pop across these teeth, and it would send a telegraph directly to the firehouse telling them exactly where the fire was. Worked pretty well. Now we have a machine operating, but the problem is it still required a person as a sensor. So the next step was to try to figure out how can we use a machine to sense the fire. So they developed two electrical plates, and they just needed something to tell them when there was a fire so that the two plates could come together and the signal would go to the firehouse. That solution? A stick of butter. The butter would melt, the two plates would come together, the notification would go to the firehouse, everything was good. So that led us to the modern smoke detector, which is a small amount of radioactive material sending a stream of ions through a chamber. When the particles from a fire drift across that chamber, it takes some of the ions, decreasing the amount of electrical current going through the ions. The next thing you know there's a fire. The problem is it required hard wire. And still to this day in America, only 12% of housing has a monitored fire alarm system. Nevertheless, a fire alarm is better than no fire alarm, so along comes the battery-powered detector. And the battery-powered detector is much better because a homeowner can install it themselves, and as long as they keep the batteries there, they're safe. But we recognize, and municipalities recognize, that those batteries die, and then people die. So most municipalities today have a rule that new construction needs hardwired fire alarms. And most municipalities, in recognition that batteries die, are now requiring 10-year battery devices. So now let's talk about New York City's gas problem. So a brief history of gas. 1823, the first gas pipes laid across Grand Street in New York City to do outdoor gas lighting. 1869, that first apartment house gets the first indoor gas lighting. 1920s, we have our first gas stoves. 2023, we have the same gas stove, very nice, but it's on the same gas piping as the 1920s gas stove. And that's the problem with the housing stock across the United States. So New York City Council had grave concerns about natural gas. So they're concerned about our aging infrastructure. They know that it's leaking. They're concerned about indoor air quality, and there's been a lot of studies and a lot of brouhaha lately in the press about whether the burning of natural gas causes all kinds of indoor air quality issues. There are gas explosions, and specifically there were two major gas explosions recently in New York City, the 2014 East Harlem explosion that killed 8 people, and the 2015 East Village explosion that killed 2 people, 250 firefighters, basically leveled about a third of a city block. So New York City Council is getting very concerned, plus they're aware that climate change is real. The natural gas that leaks out of our stoves and our dryers is equivalent to 500,000 cars on the streets of the United States. So if we could monitor and catch those leaks and shut them down, it's the equivalent of taking 500 cars off of our streets. They looked to Japan. In Japan, in 1980, there were 50 deaths from natural gas explosions. They began to monitor natural gas, and by 2015, when New York City Council was looking at this, they were down to 2 deaths, and for the last 3 years, there's been 0 deaths. So in 2016, after these 2 explosions, New York City passed a law that said, Local Law 157, we have smoke detectors, we have requirements for carbon monoxide detectors. As soon as there's a national standard for natural gas detection, New York City DOB has 180 days to publish a rule, and everybody needs natural gas detection in New York City. Everybody then forgot about this for the last 6 years, except for the National Fire Prevention Association and Underwriter Laboratories. So this past April, National Fire Prevention Association published NFP 715 that says, okay, we now have a national standard for natural gas detection. The detectors have to be within 10 feet right to left of the device and have to be 1 foot down from the ceiling because natural gas rises. It can be either an unmonitored device, or what's important for all of us here, it can be a monitored device. So that device is going to alert at 10% of LEL, which is the lowest explosion limit. So if we were to pump natural gas into this room right now, the lowest explosion limit is when we put in 5% of natural gas compared to the 95% of oxygen. At that point, it can explode. So the NFPA said, we want these detectors to alert at 10% of that, so at 0.5% of gas per volume. At that point, the monitor will go off, natural gas leak detected, evacuate immediately, call 911. Now the problem, and all of the municipalities across the country, I believe, are going to start wrestling with this problem. Do we use a monitored detector or do we use an unmonitored detector? Because obviously an unmonitored detector is going to be less expensive in the short term. Because this is what happens when we use an unmonitored detector. The alarm sounds within 1 second. It's a 10% of explosion limit. Within 5 minutes, the tenants around that space hears the thing goes on. They run down to the street because it told them to evacuate. They call 911. Next thing you know, 5 minutes later, the fire department shows up to the building. Now, the fire department has a terrible job because they know that there's a natural gas leak in the building, but they don't know exactly where. They can only move slowly through the hallways with their gas sensor trying to find out where the leak is. And it's kind of an evil game of Russian roulette because behind the door where the leak is, the gas is building up to potentially an explosive limit. Firefighters typically promise their families, their children, that they're going to come home tonight. So after about 20 minutes of looking, and before oftentimes the utility gets there, they shut off the gas to the building because they don't know where it is and they don't know how much the gas has built up. Now, when they shut off the gas to the building is now safe, lives are saved. Only the utility then can turn back on the gas. Before they'll turn on the gas, they want to make sure there's no leaks. So for the next 6 days, they have to pull away all the stoves from the walls, they have to cap all the gas services, and then they pump up the pressure to 600% of its normal pressure. Now, that's only 3 pounds compared to the half pound that's normally in the lines, but quite frankly, nothing when pressed up to 600% of its normal pressure is going to hold. And in fact, almost no building holds. At which point, the utility locks off the gas meter, and the building has to repipe the building, which can cost anywhere between $200,000 and $2 million. It's going to take 3 months, and the people are going to be on portable boilers and no heat, no cooking. So there's a much better solution through LoRaWAN, as you might imagine. So in the LoRaWAN solution, 1 second, the alarm detects 10% LEL, and that's where ProSentry, our company that I founded, steps in. We then send a text within 10 seconds to the property manager, to the resident, to say that there's a gas leak detected at the kitchen stove at apartment 31J, 211 West 220th Street in the Bronx, and it's at 10% LEL. Within another 20 seconds, there's a live operator call calling people to action immediately, calling the resident, who potentially is an elderly person, thought they turned on the stove, it didn't catch, it's pouring out gas, they go, oh my goodness, they turn it off. Now, the nice thing is within this text, it also has the hot link numbers, so they can call right down to the front desk and say, oh my goodness, I'm sorry, I turned off the stove, it's okay. Likewise, they can tell the operator. Now, the operator has a minute and a half before they have to call the fire department. In that time, hopefully the super has also got the message, come upstairs, turned off the gas, open the window. But even if the fire department does come, when they come, they know exactly the apartment, they know exactly the appliance, and they know now, because through the magic of LoRaWAN, we've updated them every 30 seconds of what the lowest explosion limit is now. And so now we're at 20%. Still safe for the firefighter to run upstairs, and now, rather than not being sure what door to open in their fire department way, now they know. It's behind apartment 21J. We're knocking down the door because nobody has the key. We turn off the stove, we open the window, and we go home, which means they can take care of other fire emergencies rather than spending 20 or 30 minutes in this building. I want to talk now about the reliability of monitored detectors. 6% of fire-related deaths result from unpowered, hardwired detectors. Simply, the breaker is off. 67% of fire-related deaths result from discharge batteries. So even though they have those annoying chirps, people ignore the chirps, and eventually the chirp goes away. Peace reigneth until there's a fire. Monitor detectors, LoRaWAN detectors, not only detect and report emergencies, but confirm the ability to detect emergencies. So it wins the race against time. Gas concentrates until it explodes. LoRaWAN detectors give the location and concentration of the leak. LoRaWAN detectors confirm operational readiness multiple times a day. That saves lives and property. Great. So, states are already beginning to understand LoRaWAN technology, which is amazing to me. So Massachusetts, for existing properties where they required 10-year batteries, now also allow wireless solutions, which means LoRaWAN. In New York, the same. In Illinois, the same. In Indianapolis, the same. In Florida, in existing and new buildings, they're allowing LoRaWAN solutions. Likewise, California, in new buildings, you don't have to have hardwired devices. You can use wireless sensors. So New York State, in fact, Leroy Comrie, who's one of our senators in Queens, has a constituency of many people who are underprivileged. And he's aware that in many of those buildings, particularly in projects, there's a lot of natural gas leaks. So he has already put it before the state legislature in New York State that all apartments, all housing have to have natural gas detection and that it has to be monitored. Now, that law didn't pass last year because it said basically that the utility company had to monitor. Utility company said, wait, those aren't our pipes upstairs, don't put us on the hook. So Senator Comrie, we believe, is going to be reissuing this bill this year, and he's watching what New York City is doing to say that it has to be monitored by a central alarm company, and those statistics have to be given to the state. And that's where ProSentry can help. So in terms of New York City, I testified actually just 2 days ago before the City Council in support of the fire department. The fire department is a huge supporter of LoRaWAN connected natural gas detectors because, as Chief Hodgins said and the former Fire Commissioner Sal Casano, it will save firemen's lives. The NFPA and Underwriter Laboratories obviously believe in this technology. Con Edison has already installed a similar technology in their basements of New York City at the point of entry where the gas comes in to great success. They've already found like 1,500 leaks. And National Grid is so excited about our system and this potential for saving themselves time and money that they've agreed to connect directly to ProSentry's output so that we'll give them even the customer service number of where there's a leak. So now we have the big turn. Once we install a LoRaWAN signal throughout the building, because quite frankly, while Senate is our good partner and we rely on them, for mission critical, we're still going to install gateways within the building to make sure that we have proper signal. But because the municipality has required this, and the building now has to install it, now we have a LoRaWAN signal through the building, which means we can start installing modular, comprehensive monitoring. We can watch for water leaks, which means, as we all know in this room, point-of-leak water detectors under sinks, behind toilets, at air conditioning equipment. We can monitor for broken exhaust fans, because right now the only way that a building knows their exhaust fans are broken is not because they go up and check every week, because very few buildings do that, but because they start to grow mold inside showers. And the problem is that a child who grows up with visible mold at the age of 3 is 700% more likely to develop asthma in their life. So this is a public health crisis. They can also sample for air quality, particulates, and VOC. They can be notified that an elevator has stopped working overnight, and our system can even call out to the elevator repair company. We can monitor those side doors that many buildings have to let them know that a building has been left ajar. We can let them know if somebody is smoking or vaping in a non-smoking apartment, which is a huge thing, as it turns out, for rental companies and hotels. We can let them know that there's rodents. And finally, we can let them know that the boiler's cold. Now, the interesting thing is, there was a big push towards smart buildings years ago, and still to this day, using building management systems, BMS systems. The problems with BMS systems is that they're hardwired, they're expensive, there's a server in the basement that somebody in staff has to be trained to use. And as soon as that person is trained to use that, he then leaves for a better job because they lost their person. And so many of these BMS systems don't operate. The beauty of our system and of LoRaWAN is that it's simple, black and white. There's a leak in apartment 21J, go there quickly. There's no new piece of technology for the building porter. They're just simply getting a text, and if a text is too tech-savvy for them, they're getting a live operator call. So buildings have 3 pressure points. They have insurance. Right now in New York City, an average water loss in a premium building is $54,000 with the people out of their apartment for 3 months. It's incredibly expensive. Across the country, it's about $11,000. Insurance companies are not going to allow this continue. And in fact, if a policyholder has 2 insured losses, it's almost impossible to get reinsurance, and so typically then they can't get insurance anymore. So it's a big thing to stop these leaks at the bud. Within 15 seconds of a leak going behind the toilet, everybody knows about it, they go upstairs, they turn off the toilet, they solve the problem with a mop rather than a ceiling coming downstairs. For residents are incredibly frustrated in multi-tenant buildings where they have to be the one that knows that the boiler went cold overnight, they found a rat in the hallway, they have a ceiling coming down because there's a leak from upstairs. Why doesn't the management company know about this? With a LoRaWAN monitored system, all of these things lets the management company be ahead of the curve. They manage the buildings. They know before the owner knows that their air conditioning system is leaking. And finally, government legislation is pressure on the building. We believe that the different municipalities, now that there is a national gas standard, and now that there is such a thing as low-cost LoRaWAN management, we can then bring this kind of solutions to these buildings, and the legislation is going to push them to adopt it. So buildings have 3 benefits from LoRaWAN: better management, lower insurance, legislative compliance, and it's much better than this guy. I'd like to thank you all very much.